What if I told you that England's most famous queen, the legendary Virgin Queen, carried a secret to her grave so disturbing that it was erased from official history? Beneath the powdered mask and glittering gowns was not a picture of royal perfection, but a body ravaged by poison, deformity, and something even darker. When her attendants prepared her for burial, what they uncovered was so grotesque, so politically dangerous, that it was buried twice, once in her coffin and once in silence. To this day, the truth still lies hidden under the stones of Westminster Abbey. This isn't only the story of a queen's death, it is the unraveling of a myth that held an empire together. Picture the moment. The year is 1603. Elizabeth the Martyrs, England's golden monarch, once feared and adored across Europe, now lies motionless in Richmond Palace. Heavy curtains shut out the daylight. Candles throw trembling shadows across the chamber floor. Her body is draped in crimson cloth, but her face, once painted like a mask of theater, has caved into a waxy, lifeless shell. Her lips are torn and bleeding. Her eyes, once blazing enough to silence armies, now stare into nothing. The royal physicians approach cautiously. No autopsy will be ordered. Monarchs are not dissected like commoners, but whispers already race through the palace. Her strange final behavior, refusing food, refusing rest, standing for hours in silence, terrified even her closest attendants. Some said madness had consumed her. Others suspected poison. But no one was ready for what her body would reveal. When her corset was loosened after decades of constriction, a foul stench filled the chamber. Her skin was blistered, bruised, discolored in shades of green and black like rotting fruit. Her chest and stomach bore wounds hidden for years, some still raw, others sealed under thick layers of lead paint and heavy perfumes. One physician staggered back in shock. Another crossed himself in fear. This was no ordinary corpse. This was a ruler who had reigned in splendor while her body silently decayed. Elizabeth had delivered thunderous speeches, danced at courtly feasts, led armies with iron resolve, yet beneath the jewels and white mask, her flesh was collapsing. What lay beneath her painted face was more than decay. It was a revelation so dangerous it could shatter the illusion of divine monarchy itself. And so, it was never written down. The most horrifying secret of all was meant to stay locked in that room forever. In her final hours, March 1603, Elizabeth slipped into a realm of whispers and shadows. She spoke in fragments, in riddles that unsettled her ladies-in-waiting. They found her standing motionless in the middle of her chamber, eyes fixed on unseen horrors. She refused to sit. She refused to lie down. Even after collapsing, she rose again, trembling, her gaze wide and unblinking. Her skin had turned ashen gray, her lips split like weathered parchment, her bloodshot eyes bulged with terror. Death was closing in, but she fought it with a stubborn defiance that unsettled everyone who watched. One courtier wrote that she winced at the slightest touch, as though her very skin burned with pain. At times, she muttered odd phrases in Latin, words no one around her could decipher. Her hands trembled uncontrollably, yet she refused any examination. When a physician dared to take her pulse, she snapped, "I will not be undone." The mask she had worn for a lifetime was breaking. Once famous for her grand gestures and theatrical presence, Elizabeth now looked like a shattered reflection. She laughed at empty air, recoiled from her own image in mirrors, and whispered about dark figures lurking in the corners of her chamber. To her, they were real, and they were coming closer. Prayers brought her no relief. Hymns failed to soothe her. She was trapped in a private nightmare no one else could reach. Behind locked doors, her counselors whispered in dread. They avoided saying the word aloud, but all could see it. The Queen's mind was slipping. Was it poison, fever, or something far more sinister? None could agree, but all knew the truth. Something was terribly, irreversibly wrong. Still, Elizabeth would not yield. She resisted sleep. She rejected confession. She defied death itself until her strength deserted her. Only then, as her body was prepared for burial, did the final horror emerge. By candlelight, her women began the sacred rituals of a royal passing. The silks were removed, the wig unpinned, the bedclothes folded back. But when they touched her painted face with warm cloths, the illusion dissolved. For decades, her alabaster skin had been praised in portraits and poetry. But it was no divine blessing. It was a mask, a thick paste of white lead, vinegar, and perfumes reapplied every single day for 40 years. And now, in death, the mask fell apart. The paint peeled away like curling wallpaper, revealing the truth beneath. Her skin was mottled and bruised, blistered and broken. Some patches were blackened, others oozed with pus and blood. What lay beneath was not beauty, but corruption. The very cosmetic that had created her legend had also destroyed her, cell by cell, year by year. Her receding hairline exposed a skull pitted with sores and lesions. Beneath the powders and rouges, nothing of the radiant Virgin Queen remained. Only a body ravaged by poison, consumed by her obsession to preserve an image that ultimately consumed her instead. But here's the part that chills the most. This wasn't ignorance. Hidden notes and private letters suggest Elizabeth knew exactly what she was doing. Again and again, physicians begged her to abandon the poisonous paste. Again and again, she refused. That white mask was no longer makeup. It was her identity. To remove it would mean revealing weakness, mortality, and the human frailty she had spent a lifetime denying. In the end, it wasn't war, age, or heartbreak that disfigured England's greatest queen. It was vanity itself. And she embraced it, fully aware of its deadly price. Though the crown forbade autopsies on monarchs, something very close to one unfolded behind the locked doors of Richmond Palace. The physicians, bound by secrecy, dared to examine her remains. What they found unsettled even the most experienced among them. Her liver, once thought the seat of vitality, was hard as stone, shriveled and blackened like charred coal. Her kidneys, too, were ruined, brittle as parchment, crumbling under touch. And when her abdomen was opened, an odor unlike ordinary decay filled the chamber. It was sharp, metallic, chemical, a smell that stung eyes and throats. Pooling deep within her body was a substance they had never seen before. A thick, tar-like fluid, clinging like glue to bone and tissue. One physician tried to collect it in a glass vial, but it smeared and stuck to his gloves, resisting capture. They called it the rot within, or guessed it was black bile, one of the ancient humors. But none could truly name it. Modern medicine, however, does. Lead poisoning. Decades of absorbing toxic metals, from her cosmetics, her medicines, even her gilded tableware, had slowly eaten away her organs, cell by cell. To Elizabeth's doctors, it looked like a wasting of the royal core. They lacked the language to explain it, but what they witnessed was the slow chemical destruction of a body that had been unraveling for decades. She hadn't simply died, she had collapsed piece by poisoned piece, and the deformities didn't stop there. Elizabeth's public image had been sculpted with flawless precision, majestic gowns worth fortunes, a regal spine held straight by will and whalebone, and a gaze that pierced the souls of men. But in death, the mask fell away, revealing what the years had done in secret. Her spine curved sharply, like a crooked question mark, the bones pressed forward under her thin, wasted flesh. Years of rigid ceremony and crushing corsets had twisted her back into unnatural shapes. The muscles along her shoulders were gone, melted away with time, leaving her frame uneven and slumped. Even her ribs told the story of suffering. Some were collapsed inward, others overlapped grotesquely, all warped by relentless compression. The illusion of majesty had been maintained at terrible cost. Underneath the silks and pearls, the Virgin Queen's body had long been crumbling into ruin. This was not the body of a sovereign at the height of her glory. This was the wreckage of a woman crushed daily by iron stays and merciless lacing, armor crafted to project beauty and strength long after both had abandoned her. Yet it was the hidden growth that horrified the physicians most. Just beneath her collarbone, near the left breast, they uncovered a swollen mass, soft, ulcerated, and leaking pus and blood. The flesh surrounding it was angry, inflamed, already decaying. It had clearly existed for years, carefully, concealed under layers of silk and perfume. Bandages had been applied often, perhaps even by Elizabeth's own hand in secret, never entrusted to her official doctors. The festering wound had been allowed to rot in silence. Some suspected cancer, a disease unnamed and unspoken in her era. Others thought it an abscess, an infection left to spread unchecked. But whatever it was, Elizabeth had hidden it from her court, her physicians, and the chronicles of history itself. And the reason is clear. Any flaw in the royal body was considered a flaw in the crown. She had built her reign on the illusion of being more than mortal flesh, yet the truth was always the same. Underneath the silk and symbols, she was human, and her body had been betraying her for years. But the most unsettling discovery lay deeper still, the so-called Virgin Queen's womb, the organ that defined her legend, her politics, and her myth. In death, it became the most disturbing part of all. During the secret post-mortem, one physician described it as shrunken to parchment, dry, collapsed, brittle, almost indistinguishable from the surrounding tissue. No blood vessels, no vitality, nothing that hinted at fertility. It resembled an ancient scroll that would crumble at the slightest touch. To her contemporaries, this seemed like divine proof of her chastity. Modern medicine, however, suggests another explanation. She may have lived her entire life with an undiagnosed endocrine disorder, perhaps Turner syndrome, Mayer-Rokitansky-Kuster-Hauser syndrome, or premature ovarian failure. Others believe she suffered from a pituitary imbalance that left her infertile. In her age, without any knowledge of hormones or reproductive health, such conditions would have been invisible mysteries. Throughout her reign, rumors whispered constantly. No pregnancies, no signs of menstruation, no romantic scandals. Elizabeth often joked that she was married to England, but behind the witty remarks may have been something far more tragic, a biological silence that chose her path for her. Some records even hint at long, unexplained illnesses in her youth, periods of weakness, sudden fevers, months locked away in her chambers. Perhaps those episodes were not passing sicknesses at all, but the hidden symptoms of a body that had always denied her what history called a choice. Those unexplained childhood illnesses may have masked something far more serious, a hidden hormonal disorder no one of her age could have understood. If her womb truly withered in life as it appeared in death, it might explain more than her legendary virginity. It could explain her chronic pain, her violent temper, her refusal to ever be seen unclothed. and her desperate grip on the image of youth and feminine power. Elizabeth ruled as a monarch, but she died as a woman whose defining absence, motherhood, may have been dictated not by politics, but by biology. And that truth was carved into her bones. Then came the whispers of an even darker theory, the hidden identity. A country rumor born in Bisley, Gloucestershire, claimed that the real Princess Elizabeth had died as a child, and to avoid Henry VI's wrath, a local boy was disguised and trained to take her place. For centuries, it was dismissed as tavern gossip. But after the Queen's death, strange details surfaced that gave new life to the legend. Attendants who prepared her body hinted at proportions that didn't seem entirely feminine. Her limbs were unusually long for her stature. Her rib cage was wide. One attendant even murmured that her hips resembled a man's more than a woman's. Most shocking of all were vague references to her reproductive anatomy. Some described ambiguity, others whispered of absence. None of these accounts made it into official records, but fragments slipped into private letters and coded notes between nobles. The secrecy around her burial only fueled suspicion. The closed coffin, the rushed embalming, the careful control over who could view her corpse. Why such urgency? Why such silence? Historians reject the Bisley Boy story as fantasy, but they cannot ignore the fact that Elizabeth's body was deliberately hidden from history. Even her portraits began to change. Her jaw squared, her chest flattened, her shoulders broadening in paint. Was this the toll of age and power, or the careful shaping of an identity that concealed something deeper? The truth is unknowable, but in the shadows of her death chamber, as her body was uncovered one final time, something left hardened professionals in mute shock. And silence, in history, often echoes louder than words. The panic was immediate. When Elizabeth exhaled her last breath, England's political machine lurched into action, not in mourning, but in damage control. Her passing was treated not as a transition of power, but as a crisis that could shatter the realm. Orders thundered through Richmond Palace. No one was to speak of her final condition, her last words, or her corpse. Guards were stationed at her chamber doors. Her attendants were dismissed or sent far away. And the royal physicians? They were sworn to secrecy under pain of death, silence enforced by the threat of execution. Why the desperate silence? Because Elizabeth was more than a monarch. She was the very symbol of Protestant England. For 45 years, she had stood as the fortress against Catholic return, the living emblem of divine favor resting on her people. To reveal that she died disfigured, delirious, or diseased would not have been a private scandal. It would have been a theological disaster. Any trace of madness, deformity, or poisoned blood could have been twisted into proof that her reign had been cursed by God. Catholic enemies at home and abroad would have pounced on it, pointing to her body as evidence that Protestant rule was unnatural, illegitimate, and doomed. Worse still, the fragile succession of James VI of Scotland, soon to unite the crowns, could have been undermined before it began. So silence became policy. There would be no autopsy, no public inspection, no chance for rumors to become evidence. Her body was quickly embalmed, locked away in a lead-lined coffin, and buried under layers of ceremony that praised her victories but revealed nothing of the woman beneath. The funeral sermons were carefully scripted, celebrating her triumphs while forbidding any mention of suffering or decline. Officially, the Virgin Queen died as she had lived, chosen, flawless, untouchable. Unofficially, the truth was lowered into the grave with her. In a kingdom built on religion and royal image, myth was stronger than medicine, and in Elizabeth's last hour, the crown chose the safety of legend over the danger of reality. Centuries later, her secrets still resist the light. Her tomb remains sealed, her body never subjected to modern investigation. Yet forensic science has found ways to peer through the cracks of her legend, using fragments she left behind. Portraits, funeral effigies, clothing, and scattered medical accounts. X-ray scans of her funeral effigy, sculpted directly from a death mask, reveal subtle asymmetries: a slanted jaw, uneven shoulders, a neck that leans unnaturally left. Combined with eyewitness descriptions, these point to chronic spinal problems, likely scoliosis, worsened by decades of rigid corsets and the crushing weight of ceremonial dress. Her preserved gowns tell the same story. Bodices impossibly narrow, waistlines forced to inhuman extremes, seams strained where they dug into her aging flesh. The garments testify to an existence lived in armor, designed to preserve the illusion of eternal youth while her body collapsed beneath it. And then there was the poison she painted onto her face every day. The white lead paste that created her iconic mask was also slowly killing her. Modern medical historians believe she suffered years of migraines, nausea, organ pain, and neurological damage. By the time of her death, the Virgin Queen was not simply old. She was a body consumed by the very image she had crafted to rule. Chemical tests on the few jars of Elizabeth's cosmetics that survive today confirmed what her doctors once feared. The Queen's iconic white paint contained staggering levels of lead carbonate, enough to horrify any modern chemist. Worn daily for more than 40 years, it would have thinned her skin, eaten into her flesh, and seeped into her blood, poisoning her kidneys, liver, and brain from within. Yet the deepest mysteries remain sealed. Despite repeated requests by scientists, the Church of England has refused all exhumations. No DNA, no scans, no forensic testing. Her tomb at Westminster Abbey remains untouched, shielded not just by stone, but by centuries of reverence and fear. Ironically, we now know more about the damage she endured than most people in her own lifetime ever guessed. But her bones, her blood, the unfiltered truth, remain hidden by design. And then there is the rumor that refuses to die. A whisper that drifts through university halls, flickers in obscure letters, and lingers in the silence of the archives. That in her final hours, Elizabeth confessed something so devastating, so impossible, that it was erased from every record and buried with her forever. Some believe she admitted to a terminal illness, a pain she had concealed for decades until the agony broke her composure. Others suggest a genetic condition, a chromosomal disorder, a hormonal imbalance that explained her infertility, her refusal to marry, and the anatomical mysteries hinted at during the secret post-mortem. But the darkest version goes further. It suggests Elizabeth Tudor herself was not who history remembers. That the child presented at court after Anne Boleyn's execution was not the same girl born at Greenwich Palace. That the monarch who reigned for 45 years might not have been born female at all. Most historians dismiss these tales as wild conspiracy, yet the evidence of silence is troubling. Crucial documents vanish from the royal archives. Letters burned, diaries destroyed. Servants closest to Elizabeth either died in obscurity or disappeared altogether. Those few who touched her body before burial never spoke of it, not once in their lifetimes. Even her coffin fuels suspicion. Contemporary accounts describe it as unusually reinforced, padded and sealed more heavily than any royal coffin before or since. And there it remains, under stone slabs in Westminster Abbey, beyond the reach of science, beyond the reach of truth. Every formal request to study Elizabeth's remains has been denied outright by both Crown and Church. But why guard her tomb so fiercely, even after 4 centuries? Because Elizabeth is not just a queen of the past. She is a symbol. Her myth is bound into England's very identity, into its Protestant triumph, its royal mystique, and its rise as a world power. To question her body would be to question the entire Tudor legacy. Her reign ended the Catholic threat, redefined monarchy itself, ignited the English Renaissance, and laid the groundwork for empire. But what if that shining legacy was built over a secret so profound, so destabilizing, that it could still threaten the monarchy even now? Whether the truth was medical, genetic, or something stranger still, it was sealed with her in Westminster Abbey. England chose not to confront it, chose myth over reality, chose silence over revelation. The Virgin Queen's final secret remains locked in stone, untouched, unspoken, protected by centuries of ritual silence. Perhaps some truths are simply too dangerous for kingdoms to survive.